first video. Hello. So today I'm going to be offering you my best advice on how to get a high predicted grade for all of you DP1 students out there. I know that at this point in your IB journey, stuff is pretty stressful. Obviously cannot compare to your second year at all, but predicted grades are very important for a lot of people, especially if you're planning on going to university next year. First of all, what even is a predicted grade if you don't know? So your school might call it a different name. Some call it projected grade, some call it predicted grade, whatever else it might be called. But essentially all it is kind of like a sum or an approximation of your performance over the first year and essentially what your teachers think you'll get as your final IB score. Supposedly it's pretty accurate, but obviously it depends on your school a lot. So if your teachers are like really generous or if they're really harsh, that plays a big role as well. But yes, it should give you more or less a pretty accurate idea of how your final score will be. Okay, so why are predicted grades so important? Obviously for university applications, depending on what you're aiming for, obviously you probably don't know exactly what university you want to go to yet, but you might have a general idea of what country or what course, what general field or direction you want to go into in the future. That should give you an idea of what kind of grade you want to be aiming for. So obviously if you want to go to a top university, you're going to want to be aiming for like 38 plus, or it could be somewhere lower depending on where you want to go. So for that reason, it's very important that you start preparing and planning early to getting your best possible predicted grades. Okay, so here are my general tips on how I managed to get predicted a 43 despite doing pretty mediocre in a lot of my classes in first year. Okay, first thing is understand how your school awards predicted grades, so like what they're based on. At my school, it was mostly based on our report card from the first year, so yeah, like your grades obviously, and also our end of year exams for the first year. So we had kind of like mock exams at the end of the first year, and those were a big factor. And then lastly, just like your teacher's overall opinion or perspective on how they think you could improve. So if you're like close to getting the next grade and they are pretty confident in your ability, then you could get a slightly higher grade than what you've been achieving. Sorry if my voice is really weird. I'm kind of sick right now. First, you should have established what your predicted grade will be based on. That will give you an idea of what to work towards and what to aim for. So first thing you want to do is obviously do really well at the end of your first year. So even if you've kind of failed some stuff in your first term, you can still make up for it at the end of DP1. That is so important. So the main thing is that you show improvement over time. So you can do really badly in the beginning, and as long as you show like an improvement gradually even, you have a good chance of getting a solid predicted grade. So what I would recommend is really putting your everything into those end of year exams. Obviously you don't need to study like crazy. Just do your best and make sure to go over topics that you found difficult or subjects you found difficult. Ask for help when you need it, all of the basic stuff. But really aim to maximize that performance at the end of the first year, because mostly you will be awarded your predicted grades either at the end of first year or at the beginning of second year, depending on your school. I also want to add that the actual experience of like studying for your end of year exams and that way like sort of going over a lot of content rather than just like the unit tests you're probably used to is also super valuable experience. Make sure to like take notes on stuff you're finding difficult both before and after your exams, because the process is honestly pretty similar to studying for mocks in your second year and even just like your final IB exams. So in that sense, it's a very valuable experience. Make sure to keep track of what works for you and what doesn't, like what study methods, all that kind of stuff. A second thing is maintain really good relationships with your teachers. So I feel like a lot of people underestimate this because ultimately like it is your teacher that's giving you your predicted grades. So it's really important that you have a good relationship with them. So if you're not super close with a certain teacher or you feel like they don't know you too well, then now is really the time to just go all in and participate a lot in their class, like show you're interested, like ask extra questions, be really nice to them, really just go all in, and make sure that they don't like argue with them a lot, or like, you know, act annoying. That all, see, the thing is, like, obviously they're meant to be objective grades and like objectively based on your performance, not their opinion, but ultimately like their opinion will subconsciously somewhat impact your grade, especially if you're between two grades. Having a really good relationship with your teacher can help boost it up to the higher grade. So make sure you do that. And it's also helpful considering you might be asking for recommendation letters for university. So again, good to have good relationships. Obviously getting higher grades is easier said than done, but remember that all of the work you put in is so worth it. Like, if you are planning on going to university next year, having a higher predicted grade will open so many opportunities for you. Like, if you get a solid predicted grade that is high enough or above average for your course, you can basically apply to anything you want without feeling restricted or like, oh, I haven't met the requirements, so I can't apply there. Really just putting everything you can into those last few weeks will pay off, I can guarantee you. Some advice for year one exams is focus on things you don't know over like just revising stuff you do know, which sounds kind of obvious, but I've overheard many people be like, oh, I don't know that topic at all, so I'm just gonna skip over it and pretend it doesn't exist. Don't do that, because that topic will show up on the test. So really revise as much as you can. Do some past papers. I know that considering you probably haven't covered all of the content yet, some past papers will be like difficult to do or not even possible if you haven't learned the stuff. But try some questions and really familiarize yourself with the format of a paper, because especially for the like essay-based subjects or questions, for like econ, for example, like learn how to write a good 15-mark essay. There's a bunch of videos on YouTube about this kind of stuff. Just like ask for a lot of feedback from your teachers as well, and just try to work on the exam technique as well. So not just not just the content itself, but also how to answer the questions in a way that IB wants you to. But overall, you don't need to worry too much about past papers. I would say main thing is be very solid on exam technique and also theory. There's obviously different ways to study for different subjects. Maybe I can make some videos about that kind of stuff next. Also, when it comes to core, because that also contributes to your predicted grade, so that would be your TOK and EE. It's pretty unpredictable, to be honest, because these grades are very random. In recent years, there's been a lot of times when teachers like over predict their students, and so sometimes to make up for that, they will under predict later on. The main thing is TOK is really like either you can do it or you can't type of thing. I personally was not a huge fan of TOK just because I feel like philosophy is a really interesting subject, but IB kind of ruins it. I think it's very subjective. If you feel like TOK is really difficult and really impossible, then I would say focus more on your EE in terms of maximizing your grade. So make sure you submit like whatever your predictor grade will be based on, or like whatever amount of your EE process, because I know that different schools have very, very different timings for these. Like some of them already finished their EE in year one and others are still deciding their topics, so it all really depends on how far you should have gotten. Like for me, I had to submit a draft, which impacted my predicted grade. I got predicted a C, so it was not great. But yeah, just make sure you choose like a good subject for your EE. I did econ, would not recommend. No, but it's pretty okay, just hard to score high. I also want to add that it's worth thinking about how much you actually need those extra core points. So if you're pretty confident in your subjects overall, or like you are pretty certain you can reach whatever target you've set, then don't stress too much about EE and TOK, because the EE is really time consuming, especially if you choose a subject like economics. I would imagine sciences is also really time consuming. So in that case, like, you don't need to go too crazy over it. Like, I barely worked on my EE over the summer, which is probably why I got a C. But regardless, like, I managed to balance out with my other classes. But if you feel like you have some difficult classes and you want to boost your IB score to the maximum, then it is worth being careful with your EE. So choosing a topic that will score well, and also putting the necessary time and effort into it. Stay in close contact with your supervisor. Make sure you're doing stuff that they want. Again, that's another teacher whose relationship you want to maintain. And remember that EE and TOK are like technically equally weighted, so you can also use that to your advantage by like focusing a little bit more on the one that you find easier or that you're more confident in being able to score highly in. Yeah, that's what I did, and I ended up getting an A for TOK and a C for my EE, which balanced out to 2 core points. There's like a matrix that determines that based on the grades you get for each one. But yeah, I think the most important thing above all is don't feel like it's too late, okay? Like, you are still in your first year. You don't need to be worrying that much already. Like, DP2 is what really matters. It's not too late to turn things around. Like, you can still improve your grades. You can still get a good predicted grade just by putting maximum effort in for a couple weeks before your year 1 exams, if you have those. But yes, don't lose hope, and also be clear on your goals, okay? You don't need to aim for a 45, which I also learned the hard way. You don't need to get a 45. That doesn't need to be your goal. Just make sure you're clear on what range you should aim for your program, and focus on getting that. You don't need to get the maximum. And also keep the subjects in mind. So like, certain subjects are more important for certain fields. So like, obviously if you want to study like engineering, you're going to want good grades in like math and physics. I applied for economics, so my focus was on math. Whatever subject is in your like course's entry requirements, if you know what course you're going to study, or you can look at a couple different courses if you haven't decided exactly what yet. But yeah, just as such, remember where your priorities should lie, because obviously you can't study like 500 hours for every single subject. Make sure to prioritize well. I don't know if this was helpful at all, but let me know if you want any other advice on anything, or if you want me to expand on anything I said. But yes, I hope this was helpful.